unless the international community, and that includes you and me, and people sitting at home and people logging on their computers, unless we collectively speak out now, campaign and insist that there has to be a complete change of direction, the situation in Gaza is just going to get worse and worse. The Israeli assault, the aerial bombardment followed by the ground assault in those 3 weeks between December and January, it devastated the civilian infrastructure of Gaza. I think what people don't realise is this wasn't a traditional war where you had one army going in against another army. This was a highly sophisticated army and air force of one state going in against the civilian population. We saw homes destroyed, schools, health facilities. We saw businesses destroyed, both in aerial bombardments on the schools and the hospital and the United Nations Centre, but also the ground assault where troops actually got out of the jeeps and laid mines around the bases of the factories in the final days of the ground assault. What is particularly shocking about that, I think, is that they had already seen the destruction of the homes and the other civilian infrastructure, including the finance ministry, the Palestinian Legislative Council building, police stations, as well as the health and education facilities. But they destroyed the cement factory, the biggest factory in Gaza and the only cement packaging factory in Palestine, knowing that the effect would be to slow down the possibility of rebuilding. The Gaza, as you know, is it's blockaded. The checkpoints are closed. There's nothing by way of ordinary trade coming in or out. There's nobody is allowed out. Nobody's allowed in except with special permits. And the only trucks that are coming in are emergency aid. So with all of this destruction, there's no rebuilding going on. There was a recent international donor conference where the international community came together to talk about rebuilding Gaza. But two things need to be said. First of all, unless you open the borders, unless you allow people in and out freely, unless you allow the kind of free movement of goods and business and people, the Gazans will be, the population will be reduced continuously to depending only on emergency food aid. These are very vibrant people, well organised people, well able to rebuild their own communities. But the international community cannot talk of reconstruction of Gaza and not demand the openings of the border, not demand that there be free movement, not demand that there's some kind of a commitment that if people rebuild their homes, that the same thing isn't going to happen again. That's very, very strongly part of what I saw there. But to me, I suppose one of the most shocking images was standing in Bairbre, which was a village. It had been 250 homes, and when we were there, it was just rubble. The homes were all reduced to rubble. The families, some of them had come back during the day to look at where they had previously lived. And it was heartbreaking. It was unlike anything that I had seen here. And although I had seen the pictures on the TV at the time of the bombardment, nothing prepared me for standing in the midst of mounds of rubble that had been a community, a living, breathing community with people, and going from there. To the cement factory, seeing the wanton destruction of the ability to rebuild, but also the destruction of of the ability of people in Gaza to provide for themselves, I think really brought home to me how much of an assault this was on the local civilian population. The United Nations were the people, the UNRWA people, the relief agency. They were the people who organised our visit around Gaza. They warned us not to go into the rubble, not to pick anything up because of the possibility of unexploded ordnance, and also because of the white phosphorus, both of which would be a threat to us. And equally, those are a threat to anybody trying to rebuild. The other thing we did was we met with the civil society there, people working in the mental health field, people working with women, people, local business people and community organisations. And they made it very clear that there's a huge difficulty about the fact that nobody's been held accountable, and it appears that nobody will be held accountable for what happened. The United Nations people also talked to us about the Geneva Convention and the fact that there is an international community there. The countries, other governments throughout the world are their contracting parties to the Geneva Convention, and yet nobody is demanding that that be applied, that there be some formal mechanism invoked to see the rights and wrongs of what happened during that 3-week period. We've got, within a 3-week period, we've not only got the destruction that I've talked about, we've 1,300 Palestinians killed within a 3-week period, hundreds of children killed within that 3-week period. We spoke to human rights, both international human rights organisations and Israeli human rights advocates, who have told us of very severe questions around the deliberate targeting of civilians deliberately shot, or possibly the types of orders given that don't make no distinction. We had women coming out of their homes waving white flags, being killed. Young girls up in the rooftops cooking their meals, which is the culture in that area. No differentiation between civilians and combatants. No thought to the international human rights standards in terms of allowing medical aid in timely fashion to those who were wounded. Also in terms of allowing humanitarian aid to be brought to the affected population in time. In terms of the weapons used, white phosphorus, for example, isn't illegal as such, but it's legal to be used as a smokescreen in wide open areas. But this was used in a way where there was nobody coming in behind that needed a smokescreen, and it was used in a highly densely populated area. And that was the awful, the terrible effect that this had. So clearly the international human rights organisations are... Amnesty International already has a report out. Human Rights Watch is about to bring out a number of reports, and if these are anything like what I saw, then there should be a huge outcry, and these should be used as a wake-up call for us all, that unless we call for accountability for what happened, unless we make the demand that there's a commitment that it cannot happen again, then we cannot justify ourselves as a civilised world and talk of democracy or of interest in democracy and peace. I think John Ging, the head of the UNRWA UN relief agency operations in Gaza, summed it up. He said, this is not about being pro-Israeli or anti-Israeli. This is about being pro-fundamental basic human rights based on the rule of law.